Hi, welcome to my broadcast, my YouTube channel, and today for reading, we're going to go over a little story time, help with the night, and put y'all at bay at rest. So, as you in tune with me, we're going to be reading this book. This is the book we're reading. It's called John William Johnstone it's the author with J. Johnstone. The First Mountain Man Preacher's Pursuit. My girlfriend got me this book, and I intended to read it to y'all. Chapter 1. Preacher pressed his back against the gully rock wall and tightened his hands on the flintlock rifle he carried slantwise across his chest. He listened intently, ignoring the thudding of his heart, and trying instead to pick up the stealthy sounds of the men creeping up the gully after him. His side stung a little where a rifle ball had ripped his buckskin shirt and burned across his flesh. He put that pain out of his head, too. Weren't nothing, he told himself. He'd been hurt. Lots worse, plenty of times. A tall man in his 30s, dark-haired and bearded, lean-bodied, but still powerfully built. Preacher knew these mountains as well as most men knew their own faces. Or the bodies of their wives. The two vermins who tried to ambush him had made a bad mistake in doing so. One of them had already paid the ultimate price. He lay dead or dying on one of the slopes higher up, his guts torn open by a shot from Preacher's rifle. His companion was still alive, though he was the one trying to sneak up on Preacher now. Normally, Preacher would have just waited for the man to come along and then blown a hole through him, but that was hard to do without any powder. A lucky shot aimed at him had clipped the rawhide thong by which the powder horn was slung over Preacher's shoulders. It had skidded over the edge of the long drop, gone before he could even try to grab it. He had already emptied his rifle, and both pistols were trading lead with the two would-be killers, so he couldn't reload. But that didn't mean the man called Preacher was helpless. Far from it. He'd been toiling up a long, steep slope to check on some traps. His horse and dog were down at the base of the slope, left behind because there was no real reason for them to have to make the tiring climb. He was halfway to the top when he heard a thrill neigh from horse and a half snarl, half bark from dog and recognized them as warning signals. Somebody was close by. Who shouldn't be? The first shot had rang out as Preacher started to turn. The heavy lead ball struck a small rock near his feet and blew it to smithereens. He saw the puff of powder smoke from a
Don't
clump
let
of
Forrest in.
fir trees
He doesn't
and
belong
was
here.
and trees and was bringing his rifle to his shoulder to return fire when another rifle cracked from above him, and he felt the fiery lance slice across his side. They had him between him, Drat and the luck. He let loose with a round aim at the fir trees anyway, then turned and dashed along the face of the slope, figuring to work his way around the rocky shoulder that jutted out ahead of him. More shots came after him, but his long legs carried him too fast for the lead to find him. He reached the shoulder, ducked around it. Behind him, a couple of men yelled at each other. White men, Preacher noted. They were speaking English, peppered with a lot of cussing. Peppered with a lot of cussing. I got him, I tell you. The hell you did. Did you see the way that bastard was running? Question. So son of a bitch who was wounded some could move that damn fast. He could tell from the sound of their voices that they were angling toward him from above and below. He sat the rifle down and drew the pistols from behind his belt. Both were double-shorted with powder charges, heavy enough that the recoil from them might break the wrist of a normal man. Preacher was anything but normal. He heard rocks clattering close by, kicked loose by the men, who was closing in from above. Preacher swung around and rugged a knob, and saw the men trying to skid to a stop about 15 feet away, and bring his rifle to bear. Preacher squeezed the trigger of his right hand pistol before the muzzle of the rifle could line up on him. One of the balls missed, but the other one plunked itself in the man's belly. He screamed as he doubled over and pitched forward, blown a couple of times before he came to a stop. He kept withering and wailing, "You son of a bitch!" The cry came from another man, who fired a pistol as at Preacher. Even though he was still a good 40 feet away, a ball missed, but he came close enough that Preacher heard the hum of its passage, though through the air. Darted around the rocky shoulder, stuck the empty pistol behind his belt. He grabbed up his rifle and started running again. He had gotten a good look at the man he shot, and knew that he had never seen the son of a buck before. The fellow was squat and bearded, with a big felt hat that had fallen off and when he collapsed. Preacher hadn't taken the time to study the other fellow's face, but he had a feeling he had never seen that one either. Now, why would two men he had never met before want to kill him? Question. He had a decent mess of clues back at his camp, but nothing worth killing or dying over. Preacher didn't spend a lot of time pondering the question. It was enough to know that they'd try to ventilate him, which, according to his way of thinking, meant it was perfectly all right for him to blow their lights out. He kind of wanted to talk to that second man, though, and maybe find out what's going on here. That meant he had to take a rebellion alive. For that reason alone, Preacher hurried along the side of the mountain, looking for a spot where he could turn the tables on his pursuer and get the drop on the man. Otherwise, he never would have run fleeing from trouble stuck in his claw. He had always been one to face up to it head on. That was the way he had lived his life, even since he came west some 20 years earlier. Of course, he hadn't come straight to these mountains. They'd been a little matter of fighting the British, first at New Orleans under Oil Andy Jackson. Preacher put those thoughts out of his mind to being chased across the mountain by some son of a gun who wanted to kill him. Was no time for reminiscing. Preacher threw on the brakes as he leaped over a rocky hump and found himself teetering on the brick of 100-foot drop. Footsteps pounded behind him. He still had one loaded pistol. He whirled around and brought the gun up. He and the men chasing him fired at the same time. That was when the ball clipped Preacher's powder. Horn loose, just as neat as you please, and over the edge it went, without even bouncing once. The two balls from his pistol powdered rock at the man's feet and made him skip backwards with a yelp of alarm. Left now with an empty weapon and no way to reload, Preacher turned and stepped off the edge of the cliff, vanishing into the empty air. The fellow chasing him let out a startled yell. Preacher hadn't done away with himself, though. He had spotted a narrow edge about a dozen feet below the rim, with some hardy bushes growing on it. He landed with a lithe agility and grabbed a hold of some branches to steady himself and keep from plunging the rest of the way to the bottom. Once he had his balance, he began working his way quickly along the edge. The cliff face jutted out above him, cutting him off from the other men's view. More importantly, the vermin couldn't get a shot at him from up there, but the men could hear the pebbles that Preacher kicked off the ledge clattering all the way down the drop-off, so he could track his quarry, and by the sound of Preacher's passage. Likewise, Preacher heard the fellow scurrying along above. The ledge angled down, and eventually Preacher found himself at the bottom where a narrow creek twisted its way along the base of the cliff. He followed it and came to the gully. During snow melt season, a stream probably ran through it, but it was dry now, so Preacher followed it diagonally, making enough of the racket so that the men behind him would be able to tell where he had gone. So that was where he found himself now, wounded, slightly a little winded, and with empty guns. But he still had a hunting knife with a long, heavy, razor-sharp blade, and there was a crow tomahawk tucked behind his belt as well. He wasn't defenseless, not by a long shot. He hadn't moved for several minutes. The fellow chasing him had to be wandering by now. If Preacher had given him the slip, Preacher heard him drawing closer, hurrying along now, muttering and frustrated obscenence to himself. Son of a bitch could have got away. Maybe Jonah was right. Maybe he was wounded. I know he came along here. Damn his hide. The words came clearly to Preacher's ears, along with the panting breaths that the men took. He was right around the bend and the gully where Preacher had waited. The man stepped around the bend and yelled in alarm as Preacher lunged at him, swinging the empty rifle. He jerked his own rifle up, not trying to fire the weapon, just making a desperate effort to fend off Preacher's rifle. The flintlocks came together with a loud clash of wood and metal, knocking the rifle out of the man's hands, and the blow Preacher aimed at his head bounced off his shoulder instead. That still had to hurt. The man yelled again and lowered his head, driving forward with a powerful thrust of his legs, while Preacher was slightly off balance. He was almost as tall as Preacher and weighed more, and when his head slammed into Preacher's chest, Preacher was knocked backward. A collision sent both men sprawling to the ground. When Preacher slammed into the earth, it jolted the rifle out of his hands. No great loss, he thought. The rifle was empty, and it wasn't very good for fighting at close quarters. Anyway, a long-barreled flintlock only made a good club when you had room to swing it. He snatched his tomahawk from behind his belt and swung it instead. The other men rolled out of the way in desperation, giving him the speed to barely avoid the tomahawk slashing head. He kicked out at Preacher as he moved. The heel of his boot caught Preacher and on the elbow, making Preacher's entire right arm go numb. The tomahawk slipped out of his fingers, but he caught it with his left hand before it hit the ground. The man grabbed Preacher's arm and twisted it. Preacher aimed at a knee at the man's groin and sank it deep. The man screamed in Preacher's face, but didn't let go. They rolled over and over, grappling with each other. The man's hat came off. A long, fair hair flopped over his face. A mustache of the same shade drooped over his mouth. Preacher was more certain than ever now that he had never seen this vermin before. This was mighty curious, too. Usually when folks tried to kill him, they had good reason, or what they thought was a good reason anyway. The man drove his face at the side of Preacher's head. His mouth was open, and Preacher knew what was coming next. The son of a bitch wanted to bite his ear off. Preacher jerked his head to the side, avoiding the snapping teeth. He whipped it back the other way so that the skulls banged together. Preacher would match the hardness of his noggin against anybody else's, but he had to admit that he saw stars dancing around behind his eyes. Both men groaned and seemed a little appellated. The fleeing was coming back into Preacher's right arm and hand. He reached for his knife and closed his fingers around the leather wrapped handle and pulled the weapon free of his belt and slashed at the man's leg with it. The blade cut through buckskin and flesh. The man howled, let go of Preacher's other arm, and drove the ball into the hand hard against Preacher's jaw. Preacher's head was forced back until he felt like his neck bone would crack. Whoever this fellow was, he could fight. He was almost as adept in rough and tumble as Preacher. But there was only one Preacher, and he had come by his reputation as the toughest he-coon in the mountains. Honest like, preacher kneed the man again in the belly. This time, instead of the balls, he walloped him across the face with a brass ball that was at the end of his knife grip. The man struggled, were growing weaker now, sensing maybe that he was losing the fight. The blind man made a last-ditch effort. He heaved himself up off the ground, arching his back so that preacher was thrown off to the side. Then he rolled over and scrambled frenziedly for the rifle he had dropped when the fight began. He was closer to the weapon. He got there before preacher could stop him. Grabbing the rifle, he lunged to his feet and swung around, earing the hammer back to the full cock. Preacher scrabbled up, too. He saw the barrel swinging relentlessly toward him. The survival instinct took over then. Preacher still gripped the tomahawk in his left hand, but he was almost as deadly with his left hand as he was with his right. His arm swept up and back, and then clashed forward. The hawk spun across the space between the two men with blinding speed and landed with a meaty thunk. Just as the man pulled the trigger, the flintlock roared, but its owner was already going over backward. His skull split open by the tomahawk that had landed with terrific force in the middle of his forehead. He fell on his back and lay there twitching as blood and brains oozed out around the blade. Well, hell, preacher said with heartfelt disgust. The man wouldn't be answering any questions now. The preacher still had no earthly idea why the two vermins wanted him dead. That's my story today. I hope you enjoyed the story. Stay tuned, because we'll be doing more. We'll be doing more in the next 2 days. So have a blessed day. And stay safe out there and be careful in this dangerous weather in Michigan or anywhere else. So be safe. Have a blessed day. Bye.